Welcome to this explainer. India has the absolute largest youth population in the world, right? Yet a massive global study just ranked us 60th out of 84 countries when it comes to youth mental health. We're falling behind Nepal, behind Bangladesh, behind Sri Lanka. Let that sink in. Every single day, 35 students in India die by suicide. That is 13,000 lives lost every single year. So today, we're unpacking this unprecedented crisis. This isn't just some personal failing or a lack of willpower. It is a systemic crisis. And we're going to use hard data, psychology, and the truth that people in power tend to avoid to explain exactly why this is happening. To really grasp the severity of this perfect storm, we have to look at the global numbers too. Between 2014 and 2024, the suicide rate for young Americans aged 10 to 24 surged by a staggering 56%. Around the world, we are witnessing a complete collapse in youth well-being. Back in 2021, major medical institutions officially declared a national emergency in child and adolescent mental health. So again, this is a measurable, documented emergency. It is not just a phase. Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to cover a global emergency, the screen time trap, economic precarity, the climate anxiety factor, and finally, reclaiming resilience. Let's dive right into Section 1, a global emergency, the data behind the distress. Researchers from Columbia and Iowa universities have confirmed a massive global spike in what clinical psychologists call internalizing conditions. Basically, young people are absorbing all the distress of the modern world inwardly. They're experiencing profound anxiety, sadness, feelings of worthlessness, and severe social withdrawal. And what turns this into an absolute tragedy is the help-seeking stigma. The data tells us that nearly 80% of those suffering get literally zero treatment. They are just silently carrying this massive psychological burden, and it is disproportionately crushing adolescent girls. Moving on to Section 2, the screen time trap, connection versus deprivation. We hear about smartphones ruining everything all the time, but let's actually look at the mechanics of social deprivation. How in the world can a kid with 1,000 followers feel completely, utterly socially deprived? Well, it's because digital interactions are incredibly fast, frequent, and totally shallow. This is essentially dopamine rewiring. These shallow interactions hijack the brain's reward pathways, and they replace the deep, real-world, embodied interactions that we actually need to build empathy. When a screen crowds out shared meals or offline hangouts, youth are just left alone, together. A massive Yale University study looked at over 50,000 adolescents and found that 4 or more hours of daily screen time significantly jacks up the risks for anxiety, depression, and ADHD. But here's the fascinating part. The damage is heavily mediated by what the screen time actually replaces. Nearly 40% of the negative impact happens simply because the phone replaces physical activity. Another 33% is because it ruins sleep schedules. Excessive screen time is quite literally starving the developing brain of movement and rest. To put a human face on that data, listen to this observation from Dr. Brian Weed. He notes that he sees kids who cannot go 30 seconds without checking their phone. 30 seconds! This level of digital dependence totally interrupts basic, real-life communication. Kids stop taking the small, totally normal social risks of real engagement. They use the phone as a shield to block out social anxiety. But guess what? That avoidance just breeds even deeper isolation. Now, there's a big scientific debate here. Jonathan Haidt argues that a phone-based childhood directly disrupts brain development, while Candace Odgers suggests that online risks just mirror existing offline vulnerabilities. But the legal system, it's starting to make up its mind. A court in Los Angeles recently found Meta and YouTube legally negligent for their role in systematically harming the mental health of an entire generation. They actually held them accountable for what their algorithms do to the developing brain. Which brings us to Section 3, economic precarity and debt, the financial weight. Let's talk about the economic reality. Globally, researchers track the NEET rate, that's youth not in education, employment, or training. But here in India, the acronym NEET triggers something else entirely, the exam identity trap. In coaching hubs like CODA, there are 156,000 students and often just one psychologist. The pressure is so intense that we saw 32 student suicides there in just 1 year. Across the country, in 2022 alone, 2,095 deaths were directly attributed to failing an examination. And for the ones who do pass and graduate, they step right into the unemployment shame loop. A staggering 42.3% of graduates under 25 simply cannot find a job. The promise of education has morphed into a trap of failure. To understand the psychology here, look at the IMV model of suicidal behavior. Step 1, economic disruption, leads to step 2, defeat. That snowballs into what psychologists call learned helplessness and entrapment. Young adults start to feel utterly powerless to change their circumstances no matter what they do. And the data shows a direct, terrifying line between feeling trapped by this economic reality and the onset of suicidal thoughts. The young people in these studies describe this entrapment so vividly. Look at this quote from 24-year-old Hannah. She described it as living life in a glass jar with an invisible barrier between you and the people you love. That captures the deep shame of the unemployment shame loop perfectly. When you face continuous job rejections after years of overwhelming exam pressure, you don't just lose income, you lose your entire sense of the future. You feel completely cut off. Section 4, the climate anxiety factor. The existential threat. Zooming out to the macro level, psychologists now have a term for this new existential dread, eco-anxiety. It's the chronic fear resulting from environmental damage. For young people today, climate change is not some distant, theoretical, political debate. It's an imminent crisis. Research shows that this overwhelming distress literally paralyzes them. They ask themselves, what is the point of grinding through education, building a career, or starting a family if the planet we're inheriting is broken? And this burden is absolutely not distributed equally. Studies emphasize that youth in climate-sensitive regions, specifically like India, are incredibly vulnerable to this distress, as extreme weather directly threatens their future safety. And the digital paradox makes it so much worse. Youth are exposed to a continuous, inescapable feed of digital doom scrolling. Social media might be a tool for activism, but it also endlessly spoon-feeds them global trauma, supercharging that learned helplessness. Finally, Section 5, reclaiming resilience and hope, finding the way out. So what actually needs to change? We have to move way beyond basic awareness campaigns and empty platitudes. We need science-backed action. If screens cause harm by displacing sleep and exercise, then we must aggressively prioritize daily physical activity and strict sleep routines. We have to break the dopamine loops by mandating device-free zones, forcing that real face-to-face interaction. And to fight off the existential dread, the research is clear. Getting involved in offline collective action acts as a massive psychological shield. This youth mental health crisis feeds on isolation, exam pressure, and systemic economic failure. But resilience thrives on real human connection. So what is one genuine offline connection you can make today to break the cycle of isolation? Step out of the glass jar. And please, if you or someone you know is caught in one of these traps and struggling right now, reach out. In India, you can call iCall at 915-298-7821 or the Vandervala Foundation at 1-860-266-2345. You do not have to do this alone. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.